for doing this. I got Tommy Park here, who is the executive director of Alexandria Soccer. Coach Tommy is a DeMatha. He played at DeMatha. He coaches DeMatha. He played at Mary Washington University. And now, as I said before, he's the executive director of Alexandria Soccer and also a licensed coach. So I'm excited to talk some soccer with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and love talking about soccer, and just chatting through all the different things that are going on in the industry.
Yeah, well, look, the podcast series is Nova Legends, and you might be a legend now, but all this DeMatha on your resume, I get the feeling you're from suburban Maryland somewhere. So folks that are not from the DC area, DeMatha is a legendary basketball and otherwise school in Hyattsville, Maryland, which is Prince George's County, right near DC. So where are you from, and how did you first start playing soccer, and who were your earliest influences?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm definitely not a legend. So, and I've seen some of the guests you've had, and I'm not in their company, but hopefully in 30 years we can have another chat. And but I'm honored to have this conversation with you. I grew up in PG County. Yeah, I grew up in PG County. Just a few blocks outside of DC. My parents moved. I'm one of 6 kids, 5 boys, 1 girl. They moved us from Minnesota. So my mom was a teacher, but my dad's a social worker. So I went to public schools until 8th grade, and was obsessed with soccer and music, and DeMatha was excellent at both of those. So just made the mile commute up Route 1. And loved my experience playing soccer, lacrosse, wrestling at DeMatha. I started playing soccer when I was 4. Ended up playing with the same coach, Eric Ferguson, one of my mentors, from age 5 to 19. Wow. So all the way through. His son Daryl was just in my wedding a few months ago. He ended up playing for the Barbados national team. So he and I kind of paired up and rode the wave through the soccer journey in the DMV. Yeah.
So what was the soccer community like at that time? Who did you play travel for? And I guess that was probably around early 2000s. So what were the league structures like? Was it NCSL and like ODP and EDP?
A lot less complex. So for the good, and honestly, it was tougher to find higher level competition unless you were on one of like 4 teams in the DMV. So there was NCSL, and NCSL Division I was where all the state champs played, and it was, promotion relegation through NCSL. Right as I was starting to finish high school, some of these, new leagues started popping up, regional leagues, it used to be like region league. And what ended up becoming national league was the standard. So there was like a Bethesda had an alliance team, a merger team, Potomac, where Freddie Adu played. Had some very strong teams. And then like Team America in the Northern Virginia area, where a lot of the, SDs and of the world.
Coach Robbie? Was Coach Robbie at Team America then?
Coach Robbie, yeah. There was, a lot of the Northern Virginia folks were in that, like Team America, Reston FC, RFC world. So there was a lot fewer teams, but it was a lot easier to identify kind of the top players, and everybody knew each other, who's in that world. There's just way more players now. So yeah. I know we want to talk about that in a minute.
So did you have to play ODP as well? So you played on your travel team. What was your travel team called again?
So I actually played for Bowie Soccer.
Okay.
We were like that NCSL Division I team, that went to tournaments. And because I wrestled and played lacrosse at DeMatha, I didn't really have the bandwidth to play on one of the other teams that my DeMatha teammates played on. I just, but it didn't affect things then. It wasn't like as important as it is now.
Yeah. So like Iceland did this big push to improve their soccer. And one thing they found was that they wanted kids under 12 to play as many sports as possible. And they'd get great coaching, soccer coaching at a young age. And they had lots of soccer coaches in Iceland as well. But they wanted them to play a lot of sports. And then by 12, the best players could specialize. So it sounds like in some ways, you had the kind of environment where you played a lot of different sports and you were just a good athlete. I know you run a travel program, soccer program, so it's in your interest for kids to play a lot of soccer, but do you see the benefit in kids playing lots of other different sports?
Yeah. So, I think like definitely from a holistic standpoint, in the average, if my child is, like you said, 5 through 12, for sure, I'm going to be pushing for a diverse level of experiences. I think even after that, it's, and I would say for 98% of kids, having a more diverse, set of athletic experiences is going to be more enjoyable, and, just from like, you could argue from a performance standpoint, having diverse sporting experiences is wonderful as well. I think I think the challenge now is that the infrastructure that is in place obviously makes it more difficult just logistically and physically to play multiple sports. Though I think if you ask any soccer coach in the area, should your child play multiple sports, the answer would be yes. Mm-hmm. From a development and enjoyment standpoint.
But do you think do you wish you would have specialized in soccer? Or are you glad you wrestled and played other sports as well?
I would have been better at soccer had I played more soccer. There's no question. Like I could argue that had I had better, better guidance over the different platforms that I played in and didn't play those other sports, I would have been, I don't know how much better. It's hard to say, right? So like, yeah. But like, did I have fun and do I regret it? No, so like, yeah. I don't know.
Did you know you were going to be a soccer coach back then? Did you have any idea that you were going to stick with this and get into the soccer business?
So I would say that soccer, I was definitely best at, but I played soccer and lacrosse in college. I played both.
Oh, wow.
And, I was always kind of interested in the business track just professionally. But, after I graduated from DeMatha, I stayed very close with Daf Evans. He's, UEFA Pro instructor now in Wales, but he coached at DeMatha 15 years. He brought me back after I played at Mary Washington. I got hurt playing indoors, tore a bunch of ligaments in my foot, which forced me to say, don't try to grind out a low-level professional career. I was on crutches for 6 months. I had to find a job, right? That didn't, but I was, Daf said, hey, come back, teach the business classes at DeMatha that I'm teaching and coach the soccer team. So I didn't think that was going to happen. It wasn't a goal of mine. It just kind of worked out kind of organically. But once I had a taste, I became obsessed with it. And to be honest, during college, I came back and was running DC United's. I played in DC United's U18, U20 teams. So like at the end of my college, that's where I started getting involved with DC United. So came back and coached DeMatha, coached the under 20s at DC United, and ran all the summer camps for DC United for a few years.
So I forgot, what was your coach's name at Bowie Soccer again?
Eric Ferguson.
Eric Ferguson. Yeah. So are there things that you learned from Coach Ferguson that you implement now as a coach and also in your program at Alexandria?
Absolutely. So, he was a major influence on me, and his approach to coaching was very different from Daff, the Welshman at DeMatha. Both mentors, both have had an influence on me, but both were like character first type people, right? They weren't, they prioritized, I think, the values first, and then tactically they were very different as well. But it just kind of showed to me what are the priorities in the soccer experience. It didn't really didn't become more interested and focused on the tactical part of the game until I got to Alexandria.
Okay.
And that's really when I think being surrounded by people that were, obsessed with that part of the game meshed in, the two together to what our focus is now.
Okay, well, so you end up at DeMatha playing for Coach Dolph. Is that what you called him, or you called him Coach Dolph?
Yeah, Daff is his Welsh is his name, but DAF Daff. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll keep it simple for now. So, well, first of all, one thing that I think is a challenge for soccer is that Maryland and DC schools play their high school in the fall.
Yeah.
And most of America does the same thing. But for some reason, Virginia plays high school in the spring. And what that does to travel programs, it's very unfortunate, especially for the kids that are different from all the other kids in their jurisdiction. So if you play for your Alexandria teams, the kids that go to private school or live in DC or Maryland, in the fall, they're really busy, they're tired. So when they go to practice and they show up at state cups and stuff, they're very tired. And then in the spring, when they have a lot of time on their hands because they don't have a season, the Virginia kids are in season in high school. So first of all, do you think it's something that should be looked at in trying to get all the kids to play high school in the same season?
100%. I actually had this conversation with the Alexandria City athletic director, the high school athletic director and head coach 3 weeks ago. We sat down, because I love and appreciate the value of high school sports and the high school experience. Having obviously coached for many years, there's a massive benefit to that experience. And there's a massive benefit to experiences that on the club side, which because of what you described with the high school's kids being split, makes it really tough to have a good experience, right? With high school club coaching, playing, there's always a conflict. So to that point, my question is why do the Virginia teams play in the spring? And I think you could probably go back to ADs, however many years ago, right? And then challenge what's the benefit to doing that now? And if there's no real benefit, because honestly, from a facility standpoint, there's more space in the fall in Virginia. There's fewer sports that play. So it would make sense from a logistical athletic director, transportation, facility management. And quite honestly, there's very few players who play football and soccer, right? Which would be the main conflict. Obviously field hockey on the women's side might be a conflict. But other than that, I would say that it makes sense to shift it to the fall so that the opportunities for Virginia high schoolers are equal to that of the rest of the country.
Right. And how important do you think, DeMatha high school soccer is very important. There are some places, like for example, in Loudoun County, the best players don't play high school soccer. In Fairfax County, Arlington, Alexandria, it all depends on how good your team is. It could be important to you if you have good teammates there. How important do you think high school soccer is to the development of kids? And how important was it to you at DeMatha?
Well, I think to me, it was incredibly important because we were the number one team in the country and I got to play with 15 guys who were going to play it in college level. So it was an all-star team. And we had an A licensed coach and we had an unbelievable schedule. And so to your point, like some high school experiences, that the experience, varies widely, right, at the high school level. So like the way that when people ask me, should my child play high school soccer, it's very much an individual conversation and I don't think it should be a mandate. Like, I think it should be managed by parents, coaches, club management to have an individual conversation. So that's my perspective on high school soccer. I think it can be an incredible asset. I also believe that we shouldn't fight where the progress we've made in this country in terms of the development of our club system. We've tried so long to get our club system and the education that we have at the club level in line with the rest of the world. And I think the high school soccer experience and the benefits that come from that right now are kind of, not because of what we talked about from a logistical standpoint and some of the other things, we haven't really adjusted the high school structure. And I think that's a conversation that, we've tried to push. And I'll say, we've talked a lot about DeMatha, but a lot of the coaches at the high school level who used to train 5 days a week and play 2 games and have 3-hour practices, they're not doing that anymore. They're only having 2 practices a week and 1 or 2 games. And I think those adjustments on both sides will make, both experiences more able to coexist, so you don't have 25 games in a high school season in 3 months. You don't have, 3-hour practices for, in 7 days a week. It's much more in line to kind of say, hey, let's do both of these. Let's do a lighter club season, but some, right, there's in the fall, let's get them all on the same, platform. And then I don't think we have to have this like high school verse. I think it's like, hey, let's do both, and like get on the same page and work with each other.
And that was a great thing about the CCL in that they really shut down the games in March and April in Virginia so that the kids that played high school, you didn't miss anything. It was unfortunate for the kids that are playing private or Maryland who happened to play for Alexandria, but the kids like my son who played high school, it was great for him. So when you played for DeMatha, would you get exposure to colleges at DeMatha because your teammates were so good, or were you like the kids today that most of your exposure came when you were playing for your club team?
Yeah. And you know what? Great question, right? No exposure at the high school level, even having 15, division, NCAA players. So that's the challenge, right? It's really tough for college coaches to come out and watch high school games. And actually, I bet if you ask college coaches when they would like the high school season, they'd probably say all in the spring, Yeah. But that's what club is for, right? So the club schedules and the logistics of a club experience is built for making it easier. I'm more speaking at the high school level, right? For coaches to come out and have a look. I'll say that like there's a lot of discussion about how legit that is, how, are these showcases really worth it? Are our D camps really worth it? And I could, maybe kind of getting to that point in some of the conversation we're having, like there are so many players more. I mean, I think if we look at the number of players that played when I was growing up in this area and where there are now, I would imagine 10 times the number of players, and definitely 10 times the players that have the aspiration to play at the next level, which is awesome. I mean, that's really cool but that has created an extreme challenge for, kind of the identification process, the player profile, by the way, in terms of like what's valued, you and I have talked about this, and, in years is such a wide range. I think the NCAA platform, it being a 3-month season and having unlimited subs, has an effect on what player profiles are valued, So look, I think that the pipeline and the opportunities and the platforms that exist right now are all being shaken out as the last 10 years, really last 15 years, the club structure, the professionalization of clubs has improved.
Yeah. So Well, that's great. So at DeMatha, were you a starter? What position did you play? And you ended up going to Mary Washington. So explain the process of your development in high school and how you end up in Mary Washington.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was not the top five. I was not within the top five players at DeMatha. But I played center mid. You know, I grinded my way into, you know, from the freshman year to the JV team, sophomore year, to getting some minutes my junior year and starting my senior year. So, I mean, there were guys every year, right? That were 10 seniors every year that were very good. So like you had to wait your turn, you know, really at DeMatha. And I think, you know, it's becoming that way at really almost every school, right? Public and private. There's so many players. There's 200 kids that come out to Alexandria's high school tryouts. Like, it is very difficult to participate in some of these teams, and the same with club, by the way. But you know, you're asking me my experience. I would say that, like, I wasn't like found at a showcase. I picked the schools that I wanted to go to. I had some stretch schools that were bigger schools that I contacted: Division I, Division II, Division III. So there was like the Elons and the of the world that were Division I at the time. There was the Wheeling Jesuits, Division II, that I looked at. And then there was the Division III, the, you know, CNUs, Salisbury's, you know, the DMV circuit, right? And those were all my list. And I think at the end of the day, I picked a school that became most of the combination of great academics, affordability, and competitive level. And they were like, Mary Washington finished, I think, 7th in the country that year before I went. So I was like, this is awesome. And I can play 2 sports. So it was just very unique to my situation. But I think, like, what I try to share with our student athletes in Alexandria is, you know, not every person's journey is going to be the same right here. And I think the majority of our student athletes who have, you know, expressed interest in playing soccer at the next level, they're going to have to do something more like I did. You know, they're going to have to, I mean, I stopped coming back from a visit at Virginia Wesleyan, I think it is. My dad and I, we went down there. I did an overnight. And on the way back, I was like, can we stop at Mary Washington? This is how it happened. You know, like, I stopped, I just do a tour, self-guided. We go to the gym and I'm like, hey, like, is by chance the soccer coach here? He happened to be there. I go into his office. I sit down with him for an hour. He's like, oh, you play at DeMatha? I was like, yeah. And he was like, well, you know, let's talk. So it was not an email. It was not a phone call. I literally showed up on his doorstep. And then, you know, I had a great career at Mary Wash and loved it.
Well, so it's interesting because in Virginia, you have lots of Division I schools. Everyone knows them: UVA, William & Mary, Richmond, Tech, Madison, whatever. And you have Division III schools. Lots of very competitive Division III schools. You have Mary Washington. You have Christopher Newport, Wesleyan, many of them. Washington Lee. There's almost no Division II. Only Division II schools are the historically Black universities, colleges: Virginia State, Virginia Union. But Virginia Division II doesn't even exist in Virginia, except for a few schools. And Division IIs can offer scholarships. Division I, Division III schools cannot offer athletic scholarships. So last year, the player of the year in high school soccer in the northern region was Carter Berg. He was South Lakes player, great player. He was, I think, 2 or 3-time player of the year. He goes to Mary Washington. So I'm like, wow. And then this year, my son Chandler, who played in your program, of course, for 5 years, one of his best returning teammates, Tristan Kickbush, and there's a whole bunch of Kickbushes that came before him. He just signed with Mary Washington. So, you know, for any player who's thinking about playing Division I college, that is a very intimidating sight. Either Mary Washington is a a great soccer school, which it is, but it really shows you the challenge of going to a Division I school and playing soccer.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, Mary Washington played UVA on Monday. I don't know if you saw that.
What was the score?
2-0.
Oh, it was close. Yeah.
Shots, I think, were 20-14. But that was a game. That was an NCAA matchup. It counted.
Yeah, I mean, Mary, the Division III schools in Virginia, a lot of them are just as good as many Division I colleges in different parts of the country in soccer. So
yeah, I mean, Washington Lee is number 1 in the country right now for Division III. So, but to answer your question, I mean, this kind of goes to the what I mentioned earlier, right? Which is identification process is extremely difficult. Number 1 in soccer, it's not like football or basketball where it's like abundantly clear who the top player is.
Your 4-4 time, your bench press, all that stuff. It's easy to know who are the Division I players in football, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you could just look at their physique. I mean, really, having gone to DeMatha and coached there for several years with my roommate was the football coach for Elijah Brooks, who's now at University of Maryland coaching. I mean, it's 90% of it is your athleticism. Are you 6'8" as a basketball player and, can you jump? Anyway, soccer, it's not as clear, and I think that makes it very difficult for the recruiting process. Additionally, at the Division I level, there are so many international players that come in, and there's certain coaches who prefer international players because they're older. It's like you're taking a gamble on a 17-year-old American who's been playing club soccer versus a 19-year-old, Icelandic player who's been playing adult soccer for 3 years, and they're proven. And they come in and they're mature and they're going to jump right into your starting lineup. So the Division I, you don't see that much at the Division III level, if at all. So you're already looking at a smaller, number of opportunities at the division level. Obviously, everybody wants to play because that's the highest level for college soccer. But then you look around the D3s and you look at their rosters, and it's generally in-state players. So, it's becoming more and more the destination for your state players of the year, go to a top Division III school, get a great education, pay in-state tuition, and contribute right away versus, take a stretch, try to compete against, all-American players who, are being recruited from abroad and from all over the region, really. If you look at, UVA's lineup, their roster, it's coming from the geographical area is just way wider. So I think what's going to happen is it's going to be less of a when you put your social media post up a thing like, oh my gosh, you're going to a Division III school versus Division I. I think it's going to be like, wow, you got an opportunity to play or to be rostered at a collegiate school. Like that alone is, you're in the top 1% of high school athletes.
Yeah. So we'll get back to your Mary Washington career yourself, but on my son's team last year at Alexandria, we won't mention names. There are at least 3 players that got lots of money to play Division II schools, but they weren't particularly worried about the culture of the school or the academic standing of the school. So they were able to. They're good players, great kids, decent students, definitely, and they were fine with the schools they went because they really wanted to play soccer. But if you want to go to a top institution, not only do you have to pay a lot of money to go to school there, and hopefully you get some financial aid, but you're going to be on a roster of 30 or 40 kids that can play. And as you said yourself, it's easy to tell which of your football players, basketball players stand out. Soccer is a lot about style. It's a lot about coaches' preferences. It's really hard to tell what type of player is going to fit into a roster. So what do you think about that? I mean, the kids that really took money are ones that really wanted to play soccer at the next level, and other considerations weren't as important to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that balance, right? Some of it is, some people have the luxury to choose, right? They have great grades, they have financial backing, they have, they have the golden ticket, they can kind of say like, I'd rather go to UVA, and not play because I've got great grades and I can pay for room and board and take out, whatever. There's a lot of kids who don't have as wide of options, whether it be because of their grades, whether it be because of the support they have, at home. So what I'm seeing is that the options are few and far between. So if and when you're given an option, regardless of the variables you just mentioned, a lot of kids are taking it for better or worse. And I think that trend is becoming more and more, the commonplace because of the opportunity, the lack of opportunities to support the number of players that we have. Yeah. So I would say that like, it's kind of, in the end, players who have decided they want to play, sometimes that desire drives them to one or two options. They don't have very many. So, we're dealing with this just a little bit now and having conversations with a few athletes who are being offered opportunities and been giving like a 10-day deadline. And I'm like, it's October, and these are, some of them are one or two are juniors. So that's even, you're kind of saying, wow, like I've got a long time. And, will I get a better academic school? Will I get more money? Will I get some money? And the seniors are like in a difficult spot where a smaller school that they're not necessarily attracted to is offering opportunities, and they're like, I'd like to wait too, but if they wait, so it's just this dance, and I think you got to surround yourself with people who are familiar with the process, familiar with the academic institutions that the kids are looking at, and really that's what I would advise to parents who are kind of helping support their kids through this process is to surround themselves with as many people that are super familiar with it.
Now, do you think it's just caused mostly by just the environment we're in, or is it mostly because of COVID, or at least made worse by COVID and all the gap years and all the other things that parents are doing to help their kids?
I would say it's definitely COVID compounded the challenge. I definitely heard from a lot of coaches who are like, I normally have like 8 to 10 spots. I only have 3 or 4. Right. That's confirmed. And then I would say it's also, compounded by the reality that, even just in Nova, you throw a rock up or down 95 and you're into another hotbed of incredible talent, and whether it's a large club or a small club, there are kids who definitely can play at the collegiate level, and I think, it's a challenge for our soccer culture right now, is that we talk about college so much, like that it's nowhere else in the world. It's the great thing about our system, because academics are what we prioritize, but the rest of the world, it's not surrounded. It's not based on like what school you get into. It's strictly like, what level of soccer are you going to land in? It's
separate. Your academics are here and your athletics are over here.
Yeah. So it's something very unique to our country. Right. And we're wrestling with it because there's not more academic institutions, but there are more players, so I think I really, kind of empathize and I think it's very difficult because I see kids who are better than I was, for sure.
So my son is kind of in that position as well, and he's a good student, and he's thinking, how important soccer will be at the next level. What did being an athlete, and you play two sports, what did being a soccer and lacrosse player mean to your experience at Mary Washington?
Yeah, so I mean, one, just from the actual, nuts and bolts, I stayed physically fit. I think a lot of people go to college, and that part of their experience is tough, right? You're studying a lot, you're socializing a lot, so just physically and physical and mental health, like it helped a ton. Socially, I was in a fraternity of teammates that are many of whom are some of my best friends, and created a network of people that are in the soccer world. So I didn't know I would land in the soccer industry, but I have 6 or 7 teammates that are in the soccer industry, running Atlanta United's youth academy, running, head coach at Hampton Sydney, connections through the Mary Washington Soccer that are running Columbus Crew, like academy, a lot of head coach. So it became not only it was important. It was incredibly important to my school experience because it filled that immediate need for social connection, for physical activity, which kind of led to just me having an incredible experience at Mary Washington.
Yeah, so I tell my son that when I went to UVA, I just went and played pickup basketball all the time. I ended up playing a little bit on the JV team, but the fact that when you're playing pickup basketball, it doesn't matter where you are. That's like kind of universal. You could be home, you could be in Charlottesville, you could be anywhere. That was kind of the way I socialized. So I can imagine playing intercollegiate soccer is even a higher level of that belonging. So anyway, who was your coach at Mary Washington, and what did you learn from him?
So Roy Gordon, he was there for 35 years. He, was an incredible team manager. Made sure that we were super organized. Our sessions were, he was very, he's a planner. So everything was, in that sense, super organized. I think he was also, just from more holistic, zoom out. He was president of the at the time, NSCAA, United Soccer Coaches, and, had built a network in the soccer community that was very extensive. So, in one way, he was, a great connector for me as I started to coach in college. I was, like I said, I mentioned, came back and ran DeMatha camps and DC United camps while I was still at Mary Washington. So he started to really kind of say, okay, get involved with your coaching licenses. So I started my licenses while I was still at Mary Washington. So yeah, I think he was certainly, had been in the game a long time in this country. He was also a tennis coach at one point. So I think, so I think there was more influence, not necessarily on like how I am from how I approach the game management style, but like very much on many of the other inputs.
Yeah, we always forget, like the generation in front of me, at least, you're a lot younger than I, but there wasn't a whole lot of soccer being played here. So a lot of times the soccer coaches that we had, they did other things. Nowadays, the guys that, my son played for, they're soccer coaches. They played soccer. They might have played another sport, but they coached soccer. But, it was different, 20, 30 years ago. So anyway, you ended up going back to your alma mater, or at least, your high school, DeMatha, which, many athletes dream about. So, and you actually taught business at DeMatha, I believe, as well. So how did you end up getting the opportunity to go back to your high school?
So Doff Evans, my high school coach, he was becoming full-time soccer, and, teaching was, kind of stretching him extremely thin. So I took his teaching position. I taught the finance, econ, accounting classes at DeMatha. and was the head coach of the JV team my first year out. And my second year joined him on the varsity staff and, started coaching club, and coached with him at DC United. So, he really springboarded me into coaching. And the business side, obviously, I learned more teaching those 4 years in terms of business management, than I did, taking classes, because I actually had to become more of an expert at it. And yeah, I mean, I ended up going to Georgetown and got my master's in sports industry management, and, got into the Georgetown network of the administrative side of things. And that really kind of gave me two different tracks, the coaching and the administration. So, after 4 years, I just, it's a longer story in terms of how I was introduced to Alexandria. But essentially through DC United, one of the board members of ASA was asking for some guidance, and a DC United coworker introduced me to him and just came and sat down with him informally. And, 6 months later, I was the first staff member at the club.
So did you become the DeMatha varsity coach first, or were you JV coach when you came over to Alexandria?
No, I actually coached with the varsity team for 2 years into Alexandria as well. I kept coaching at DeMatha. So I ended up coaching with DAF on the varsity team for 5 years, maybe. So I think I just did 1 year JV.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was the environment like? So when you came to Alexandria, and I assume Arlington was probably already massive club, and you had Lee Mount Vernon to your south. Annandale was probably a big club at the time as well. Braddock Road was a big club. So there's big clubs all around. What was the Alexandria soccer? What was kind of the reputation of Alexandria when you joined?
I mean, we had a relatively modest recreational program. I think we had about 1,000 kids, and we had about 200 kids on the travel side. So yeah, I mean, Alexandria is a beautiful place to live. It's incredibly diverse, from a, socioeconomic and, race, and culture, standpoint. And I think, the city also had been really investing in its recreational opportunities, really as I was getting there. So yeah, I mean, I saw it as an opportunity to, take a community and introduce, an incredible, a higher quality of experience, right, with the content that kids would experience, the coach, through the coaches, make it accessible so that all could play. It wasn't very accessible when I arrived, and then develop the club structure for long-term sustainability. So they actually hired me as the DOC, and I said, you really need an executive director first. And, I'll play both roles as long as I need to. I'll hire coaches, I'll train them, I'll do the rec clinics, and I'll start to develop the business side. So, because I had experience both from a business administration, and a lot of my grad program, I focused on youth soccer. A lot of my case studies, my capstone was developing a youth soccer tournament, actually. So yeah, it was like it kind of merged in my passions and my experience in education into one opportunity. And it was like a blank slate. It was really, we had two awesome part-time administrators who were running the rec league with parents. And we had a wide range of, contracted coaches, maybe 10 to 12 coaches that were there, And so I kind of saw it as a blank slate. And to me, that was something beautiful rather than trying to having to like break something down and build it up again.
One of the many strengths that I see of Alexandria Soccer is that they have a playing style where all the kids, especially at a young age, learn it and are comfortable in it. And it's based on triangles and proper spacing, but it's a passing system. And the great thing about the system is you can move kids from an A team to a B team, a C team. Kids can move up and down. And so if they're developing during the season, you can move kids, between teams, where other programs, you kind of stick with the coach for the whole year. When did you start to develop that system? Is that something that you always envisioned, or is that something that happened while you're at Alexandria?
I would like to say that, like, because it was a blank slate and we got to really say what's the best way to run a school. I mean, I think from day one we looked at what our program is as a school. I mean, we essentially are providers of coaches, and content, curriculum content, and figuring out the ways to best deliver that content over the course of childhood was what we early on kind of talked about. And like, I know we've been talking a lot about me, but really it's about the people that are in our community that have all kind of influenced the club's identity, the club culture. And we've just got an amazing team, many of whom were involved from day one in different roles. And, can mention many of the kind of founding group, from the Chris Arnold to the Grigor Boychev, who, they were both at ASA when I arrived.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And Jim Hogan, Ryan Rich, all were at ASA. And so, it wasn't like this like clean house type thing. It was, hey, let's get everybody together and educate ourselves, be humble, put your egos aside about whatever type of player you were, and let's collaborate with our strengths to introduce a system from the youngest ages. That's really how we started, is 6 through 9s, 6 through 10s. And then each year just kind of building upon that content and we are still learning, by the way. We feel like we've got a long way to go in terms of how, our content is fine-tuned and how well we can pass that on to the players.
And one of the strengths of that is because the City of Alexandria, they feel like they have I don't know if they really do, but they act like they have ownership over the club. So therefore, you don't have a lot of competition from other clubs taking over facilities and stuff. I mean, it's kind of like the City of Alexandria Soccer Club, which is a strength, because I hear, my son started at a club called Barca, which is now Dorados, and you're always fighting other clubs in Fairfax County for whatever patch of land you can find just to play soccer. You guys had some protection from the City of Alexandria the whole time. Is that correct?
I mean, there's 20 companies that run soccer programs in Alexandria.
Oh, is that right? Oh.
Just to be clear, camps, clinics, after school programs. Okay. That is one note. But I will say it is you said it's a strength, because of the City of Alexandria being independent, right, from a county, or that inherently has created this very tight-knit community feel. So, to me, that's 10 elementary schools, public elementary schools, 2 public middle schools, and 1 public high school. We've got a wide range of private schools in the area, from high school, elementary school, middle school. But because of that, from a government standpoint, you're right, that's allowed us to really just hyper focus, right? We're not, it's not unclear what our community is. And I think, I mean, look, to be honest, from a facility standpoint, I think initially it's a strength. Now it's a challenge, right? Because you can't really go outside without changing your identity, right? And I think, so what has been a strength may become a challenge in the future, a threat to the success of the club. Well,
and also one thing you've been able to do at Alexandria, and I think you've done a great job of this, the club has done a great job of this, is you have a lot of great, it's always a challenge getting men who coach to not coach boys and coach girls. Not because girls soccer is anyway inferior, just so they played soccer, they played boys soccer, of course, so they coach boys. One thing I've noticed about Alexandria, you've got great coaches that coach girls soccer and men. And obviously you got a lot of women coaches as well. How are you able to do that? How can you tell when a particular coach might be well suited for the girls side? And do you think it's better to have, like, say you have a great coach, coach one girls team, one boys team, or among others maybe, or do you think it's better to have coaches or one side or the other?
So, I mean, I know this because we've talked a lot about this, and this is, but we did a strategic plan. We sat down and made a plan. How, what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, strengths? How do we want to build that into the outcomes that we seek, and how do we achieve those outcomes? And the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because you mentioned, the gender. We host boys and girls, men and women. And I think a lot of times if you ask somebody in the Northern Virginia area, oh, how good is a club? And then, oh, they're a great boys club, and we take a lot of offense to people, evaluating a club's support of either an age group or gender, or even the quality of a club based on like how well their teams are performing in a specific league. To your point, our one of our strategic objectives is to ensure that, we create, the quality of the program that we deliver is, incredible regardless of what program you're in, and I think our staff has been incredibly committed to that. You've seen our leadership lead by example. All the people I mentioned have coached on the girls' side. They want, and if they're going to be a program leader, they can't give people guidance if they've never done it themselves, and I think that because of that, that's, you're right. Our girls' staff has more experience than our boys' staff. If you look top to bottom, our girls' coaching staff is on paper superior to our boys' staff. And I would say that, the challenges are unique, right? And I think if you were to ask me to summarize, just from the challenges we face between the boys' side and the girls' side, they're very culturally based, right? And I think that it's a lot to unpack, but what we've seen generally is that, culturally, the diverse set of people that we have that have kind of, come into Alexandria are all okay with their boys playing, but they're not necessarily okay with supporting their girl playing. And it's tragic. It's incredibly disappointing. It's something that we're trying to, over time, change the culture so that parents are equally as excited to introduce soccer to their child, to their boy at 5 as they are to their girl. And I think that will help. Then obviously once the child has a positive experience, we hope that they will stick with the game, and the depth is the same.
I always found that interesting because, like, when some of the Chandler's Alexandria teams, it would be out of 18 players or so, they would be maybe 3 kids that weren't Latino, and then on a girls' team in the same age group, of the 18 players, 15 of them would be white. It's almost, it's certain immigrant groups, as you implied, do value their kids playing, their boys playing soccer, and it's got no relation to how good the girls could be in soccer. It's just more of a cultural thing.
And to be clear, I don't think it's exclusive to immigrant groups. I think it is all. I think we are all wired from historical sexism in sport.
Yeah.
To empower young boys to play and not girls. And I think that the sexism in sport is being called out now more than ever, which is awesome. Yeah. But now, it's up to clubs, parents to empower young girls to have the same excitement and energy around being successful as an athlete as we do, and lift them up and, put them in the news as we do with our boys. So we try to be very intentional about that at ASA.
Yeah. Well, another great facet of ASA is the futsal program. So again, as I was saying, my son, when he played at Borussia Dorados now, they played a lot of 3-on-3 soccer, which is great because you have the triangle, you have a lot of responsibility, but moreover, you get touches during the off season, you just get more competitive environments. Alexandria is one of the first big clubs that I know of whose futsal program is somewhat integrated into their travel program. So you have many of your best athletes are playing futsal, they're getting all those touches and all that technical, but they're also just playing soccer in the off season. How instrumental has futsal been in the development of Alexandria?
Yeah, so it's been really fun. A group of us went down to Brazil in 2014 for coaching education, right? I audited the A license, the Brazilian A license. We also, visited a few youth academies to see how their structure was. But we also just soaked up the culture. We also took a 3-day futsal coaching course, but we soaked up the culture, right? So we just kind of were like, we're so isolated into thinking about like the European soccer academy model of, X, Y's, you do these 3 things, you have this facility, you have these coaches, you have this physio, and then you're good. You go to, South American culture, Brazil specific, and there are no 11v11 fields anywhere to be found in Rio, Sao Paulo. Like you just don't see fields. You see courts everywhere. And we were sitting back and we were like, what do we, like, we're trying to develop like the perfect 72 wide by 1, like we need the perfect dimensions to develop our culture. And we kind of had this like, light bulb went off, like, let's introduce more unstructured play. So that's actually kind of what we started to think about. And we now have 10 outdoor futsal courts in Alexandria that we built ourselves with the city, or gotten the U.S. Soccer Foundation to come in and build. We want kids playing unstructured play as well. In futsal, because of just the infrastructure being so much less to support that play, was kind of the impetus to us saying, okay, well, we're just doing kind of skill building or 3v3 or, in the winter, why don't we do futsal? And so that ended up kind of just starting as a futsal clinic, which then there was enough kids where we were like, well, why don't we start doing some games, which became an in-house league, which then became other clubs saying, hey, can we get in and play, to us now having a full-blown, competitive league, recreational league, tournaments, national champions, and we're like fully immersed in the futsal culture, which is super cool. And it's way more organic. There's still some of the, when you start getting at the top levels, different associations and what have you, but like for the most part, it's, put together a team and play, and it's a lot of fun. We're doing some awesome things in the futsal space. We view it as its own sport. And we try to deconflict it with the soccer activities. And there's some kids now who just play futsal. They play baseball and basketball, or, baseball or football in the fall and spring. And then they play futsal, and basketball. It deconflicts with basketball. So
yes, a great futsal player doesn't necessarily have to be a great soccer player, or vice versa. But if you have great technique, and you can actually be great in both. Where do you think youth soccer is now in terms of leagues? So when my son started playing travel around 2011, the NCSL was still strong as it was when you played, but the CCNL had come on and had come to be. CCNL was a Virginia conference, and in my mind, what it had done is it had given opportunities for teams like in Roanoke and Virginia Beach, Richmond, more remote areas of the state would have a chance to play better competition. I never understood what it really would mean for a team like Arlington to be in it, because they were one of the first members of the CCL. My son was at Barca, and we weren't, we didn't have the resources to get in. But so CCL became a big deal, and a lot of the best players and the best clubs wanted to be part of the CCL. Then around 2015 or so, all the rage was a DA. So U.S. Soccer picked certain clubs to be DA. That was kind of where the emphasis was, the development was. So certain school, they became DAs, and other clubs still had good travel players, but the DA was where the focus was. Then the latest thing is the MLS Next, and Alexandria was awarded MLS Next, and a lot of great clubs were as well. Some teams now are still ECNL, which is another kind of elevated league that's probably somewhere between CCL and MLS Next, but they also have a lot of great clubs. So you do have a lot of these great clubs. Unlike when you played and when my son started, you had this great NCSL where you had this relegation and promotion, but all the teams were kind of in the same pot. And there's other places to play soccer. There was EDP, probably there was ODP for like kind of an all-star travel training program. But now this is the latest. Where do you think soccer is now? And do you think this is the path that's going to stay in for a while?
Yeah, I think we're going to be in here for a while. I think we're going to be wrestling with a growth industry, right? I mean, I think this industry is not going to really stabilize for another, 10 to 20 years. And I think some of it is good, right? There are good things that come from competition, market disruption. There are good things that come from what we're seeing. However, at the individual level right now, it is very difficult to navigate for your child. So without going too much into the weeds, right, of specific DMV leagues and the opportunities that are there, my perspective is that the most holistic way to look at, an individual, let me just speak to like how to navigate it from like just a holistic standpoint. I personally believe that the coach, right, of a team is going to be the most influential input to a child's experience. The club, if the coach is at a club that is very well supported and structured, it's going to magnify that coach's qualities and support and continue to develop them. The platforms that the leagues offer inevitably will affect the last phase of a child's development, which is finding competitively appropriate competition. I think that the musical chairs that's happening with leagues is a product of some of it is in the right place, right? Clubs are trying to find competitively appropriate games. They're genuinely graduating out of a league they're in, right? So, for example, we had teams that were graduating out of NCSL Division I. Whether that's because there's all these other leagues or not, you know, it is our duty to find competitively appropriate games for players. So that kind of happened organically. And I think that that's happening more organically, you know, than folks are seeing. And that's why there's been so many platforms that have popped up. I mean, like I said, it existed when I played. It was Region League. You know, you wanted to get onto a team that had to go, you know, play at the region level. You know, you played ODP, which traveled. You know, it just looked a lot different, and there was just fewer of those. So I guess at the end of the day, like, I see this not really going away, but I think it won't change as much, you know, in terms of there'll be the same diversity of platforms and opportunities. I just don't think there'll be as much change from year to year.
Yeah. So obviously, like Arlington, great club, but they're not MLS Next, and you guys are. So let's go to Holland for a second. So in Holland, you'll have all these clubs, you know, nationwide, and they all play in regional leagues. And then, you know, they have, like Alexandria has, they have teams at every age group, and then they have a pro team, and Alexandria has the Reds. And that pro team can play up to the highest level of Dutch soccer. And this is the same structure they have all around Europe. And what it does is all the good players at Alexandria, let's say, for example, they weren't getting what they want in Alexandria, a DC United or a nearby pro team could come scout them and get them. And whenever you're at a Dutch game, a kids game, a youth game, there's always coaches from other teams looking to get players and move them up. So all the players are constantly being funneled to better players in the area. So the system moves the players to the better clubs. It takes care of itself. In American sports, and this in America, we tend to pick winners of which clubs are going to get a franchise in the NFL or MLS. We don't really have promotion. But it seems to me a team like Alexandria would be a great team for that, because you've kind of built like this community, and you've built programs, and you have teams of all levels. And I know the MLS Next is a great program, and you know you've been able to be in the CCL. I mean, you've been able to play the game how it's played. That's your job. You're going to try to put your best players and your best teams in the best leagues possible. But would you like a system in America where clubs would act independently and it would all be about promotion? Or do you think that's something that Americans? It's a system that would never work here.
Well, I think a lot of the parts of it would work. And I think we'll get closer to that in the next 10 years, by the way. You know, some of the conversations that I have with the decision makers, you know, at some of these kind of association or league levels are of the same mindset. I mean, they're having the same conversations we have, right? Which are like, how do we foster a system that leads to, you know, something more like this, you know, that we see in you know, again, European countries are much smaller than the US.
Yeah.
So like, it is much easier to do what they're doing in a, you know, some of them are, you know, the size of a state. So I think that like, we're not going to see it like it is in Europe per se. But I think that we'll see more. I think that the growth that we've seen in the soccer, the professionalized soccer industry won't have the same growth we've seen over the last 10 years. So it'll be easier for us to kind of align, right? And I think people will kind of like, they're trying to find the most competitive opportunity right now. And it's like, is it that or that? I don't even know, you know, like who's going to be playing in that league. So I think people are just kind of like, and then I think it'll kind of just funnel back in. And I think what I've always been a proponent of, instead of picking winners, to your point, I think genuinely having an evaluation system for a league where they're saying, look, these are the minimum inputs to have a professionalized club. And we're not going to exclude people who have that, you know. I mean, we have applied for leagues that have turned our club down.
Mm-hmm. It took a while to get in the CCL, right?
That's a great example.
Yeah.
And they said, we're going to wait. Mm-hmm. And my perspective, you know, swap seats with the directors in the room, because it was a club decision, right? That's how that league runs, or, you know, club directors. Will they offer a competitively appropriate game? That is what I mean, we have teams that play in every league, by the way. Yeah. You know, like, we don't care. We want competitively appropriate games. We will play a club that has one team. If that is going to be a competitively appropriate game, we'll play it. We'll play the biggest club in the country, or we'll play an international game. My point is, our job is to provide competitively appropriate games. And if we're excluding other kids or clubs from, you know, accessing a competitively appropriate game, why? To me, I don't understand that, just from like a value standpoint. And that's where I think, like, look, the security and the, you know, I think it's easy for me to say that now, right? From a larger club feeling, you know, but we've always behaved that way. You know, when we were a smaller club, our teams weren't as successful. We still, you know, we've had the same values the whole time. So, like, I think more people are going to feel more secure in 10 years in their own roles, you know, whether that be in a small club or a large club. I think people will feel more comfortable in the industry. And in turn, it'll make it much easier for kids and parents to navigate the you know, kind of extremely disjointed soccer experience, competitive soccer experience.
Well, Coach, this has been great. I have one question for you. It's in two parts, and you can answer them as you want. Do you have any quickly? Do you have any advice to parents to mentor their kids? Now, I know a lot of times people say, just tell them that you love them and everything's go big. I don't believe in that. I think there's ways that you can motivate your child and get them the same, and to help them and to solve issues that you have. And also, do you have any opinions as to how the U.S. soccer, the men's team, because the women's team has been fabulous, how they can get better? So ways as a parent to help your kid, and do you have any broad opinions about how U.S. men's can be more competitive?
Wow. All right. So parenting. One, you know, I'm not a parent. So a lot of people would tell me, you don't know, you're not in a position to make any comments here. That aside, having spoken with thousands of parents over the last 10 years and been along for their journey and the ride, you know, one, I think it is kind of expect the unexpected from, you know, I mean, we're talking about youth sports, right? Everything is relative to the next child in this experience. And if the way that a parent is evaluating their success in parenting is based on how they're comparing their kid to the next every time, it will be incredibly stressful for 15 years, because you can always find another opportunity where either your child is thriving and the top 3 player on the team and scoring a lot of goals, or you can find a place where it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to get playing time. And both opportunities are, you know, very valuable to a child's development. However, I think that piece of it is very stressful. The second and I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, thing that I would mention is one day I hope to be a parent, and I will, look when they leave in the morning, they go to school. I hope that they have positive mentors. And if I see them at a soccer practice with somebody that I do not have the same values with, I don't care how good of a tactician or, technical developer, coach they are, I'm going to have a hard time with that. And, so I think that finding a coach, a mentor, somebody who's guiding your child, because sometimes they're going to listen to them more than you. That is in line with my values is something that you can do as a parent. So if you see behaviors that aren't in line with, the club, and I think that's something that we try to do, say, look, these are non-negotiable behaviors and values that we have. And if a coach is not in line with that, we want to hear from our parents that we can find somebody who's in line with those values. So either find a club that's helping monitor that for you, or find a team, a specific team where that coach is in line with your values.
Yeah.
Second one. I don't know if you have any follow-up questions there. But...
That's perfect.
Okay. And again, this is completely off the cuff. So, from a U.S. soccer standpoint, wow. I'll say something that's not like generic, right? I think we know all the variables of like player ID and I mean, when I watch, because really what is a U.S. national team? It's a tournament team, right? You're talking about putting together a team that can perform really well in a short amount of time. They're not training together all year. I think we ignore the environments that we play in World Cup qualifying. Like I always watch our national team play away on these fields that, the condition, the grass is going to be a little slower, you just know that the conditions are not going to be what a player is playing like in club. I actually see it a lot more like high school soccer, where like the referees aren't necessarily as experienced. The competition is not playing a brand of ball that like you wouldn't
not as much practice time together like high school as compared to club.
You got a 3-month season. Like I see it very much like that, so like, you gotta have a much more simplified plan that recognizes the environment, both from the opposition, the field. Like, I think there's like some basic parts of like the national team piece that like, we're always looking at like what players and like, I think we're overlooking some of like the most basic aspects of national team play. So, I mean, that's the qualifying aspect. And then, when it comes down to the actual World Cup, again, it's a tournament, right? So like, you've got to really have a coach who can get the team together in a short amount of time. And some of it, there's without having like, I mean, we now have players who are obvious standout world-class players, the Pulisics and the McKinneys of the world. They are contributing at the highest levels. Yeah. So like they're in the squad, and I think those pillars are going to help make it easier to put together good tournament teams. Yeah. So we're on the right track.
Yeah. Well, Coach, I went way over the time you allotted me. First of all, I want to thank you for your great club. My son has had such a great experience there and really developed as a great player. And a lot of it's thanks to you and the club and the coaches that were there. But I also want to thank you for what you did during the pandemic. You provided an environment for low-income folks who didn't have internet at home to come in, and you guys provided workspace, computers that were safe for kids. That was an amazing thing you guys developed. And I think, when you do things like that, any success your club has, it's well-deserved. So I want to thank you for doing that as well. But let's keep in touch. I mean, the Zoom calls that we had during the pandemic was what almost kind of started me on this podcast, David. So, but I've enjoyed talking to you. I think we got a lot of nuggets out of here, and I just really appreciate you doing this.
Of course, anytime. Love the conversation. Thanks for sharing stories of Northern Virginia. People's experiences through sport. It's awesome, and obviously we'll be in touch soon. And I think if anybody has any questions about or controversial comments that I've made, love to chat with anybody. And our door at Alexandria is always open. So thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Any negative comments, I'll definitely send them, or positive comments, I'll definitely send them your way.
Yeah. All right, Julian. Have a good one, man.
Thanks again, Coach.
Bye-bye.